Building Sano here with the first episode of this year's Midsummer's Nightmare, the Godzillathon! Marvel Comics had the license to the legendary monster from 1977 to 1979, and if you've seen Linkara's retrospective on ROM Space Knight, you shouldn't be surprised that indeed, Godzilla was a canon part of the Marvel Universe. Emerging from the ice in Alaska, Godzilla goes on a rampage that levels the Alaskan oil pipeline. This version of the monster was born, like so many other incarnations, from nuclear tests, though in this case underwater ones that awoke and mutated a slumbering prehistoric monster. Yes, Godzilla! He proceeded to devastate Japan for 2 decades, sometimes fighting other monsters, as shown in the movies, but now he has moved on to America. S.H.I.E.L.D. is dispatched to fight him and, as you can probably guess, fares about as well as any normal military does against him. Godzilla then proceeds to use his thermonuclear breath and lights Alaska on fire! Naturally, as a human being, I am horrified by such fire and death. As a mad scientist, though, I am cackling in delight. As Godzilla proceeds on his way, they try several plans to drive him off. Sometimes they succeed, not hurting him, but at least getting him to go in a different direction. While still other times, the superheroes of the Marvel Universe must confront him. Thus is the case when he hits San Francisco and confronts the team known as the Champions, consisting of Black Widow, Angel, Iceman, and Hercules. Hercules is indeed able to accomplish the seemingly impossible, forcing Godzilla to topple backwards. Unfortunately, their interference causes the S.H.I.E.L.D. helicarrier to crash into the bay and Godzilla to escape once again. Although that's probably for the best, because soon Godzilla encounters his first new proper enemy in the book. Batragon, a kind of mixture of bat and dragon. Note to self, genetically engineer bat and dragon hybrid to ride on as my steed, if and when I decide to take over the world. Batragon, and other giant monsters like it, are under the sway of a supervillain named Dr. Demonicus and his army of similarly costumed minions. I'd certainly like to know where he got his doctorate from, since instead of just using his army of giant monsters to take over the world, he's content to use them to attack oil tankers. No, his backstory is as a geneticist studying radiation and mutation, driven mad by an accident when he was exposed to a radiation spill, which apparently made him decide that he wouldn't look ridiculous with those horns. Utilizing a meteor that emitted strange cosmic radiation, he mutated several creatures into his own army of kaijus. Batragon was the first. But like so many other mad scientists, he's too attached to his creations. So when Godzilla starts killing one named Gilaron, he swears vengeance and turns his attention away from S.H.I.E.L.D., which swoops in to help stop Demonicus. One agent in particular, Gabe Jones, begins to wonder if perhaps Godzilla is not really on the side of the angels, especially when it spares the life of longtime S.H.I.E.L.D. agent Dum Dum Dugan, who's determined to slay the beast. But it's not Dum Dum Dugan who has the right idea in fighting the beast with tanks and helicopters, but a Japanese scientist named Takiguchi, the only survivor of the nuclear test that originally woke Godzilla up. He knows that the only way to fight a giant monster is with another giant monster. So he has enlisted the help of Stark Industries to construct a giant robot to do such a thing. Normally in these types of stories, there tends to be Mechagodzilla, but this is the Marvel Universe, where we have to invent new designs and characters all the time. And thus is revealed Red Ronin, a giant samurai robot dispatched like a knight to slay the dragon. And for some reason they decided that it should be helmed by having it be controlled through thought waves instead of freaking levers and buttons. Bah, might as well be a video game. Hey, here's this perfectly reasonable controller you use with your hands. Nah, let's try out the fancy new technology that barely works and requires a peripheral. Just saying, it'll be very awkward if the pilot, the love interest of Takiguchi's assistant Tamara, thinks about her in the middle of the fight and Red Ronin tries to make out with Godzilla. Oh, but there's little worry about that. You see, by accident, the first person whose brainwaves are attuned to the robot is Rob, Takaguchi's young grandson, who's determined to stop the Americans from killing Godzilla because he doesn't think he's a threat. Oh yes, I'm sure the people who are still alive after Godzilla set half of Alaska on fire will back you up on that, kid. It's a three-way battle between Red Ronin, Godzilla, and the S.H.I.E.L.D. forces. Rob determined to keep Godzilla from getting killed, S.H.I.E.L.D. trying to kill Godzilla while also trying to keep Rob from getting hurt, and Godzilla just being Godzilla. They drive Godzilla off, for the time being. The simple fact is that even when they do repel him, the damage is done. From Seattle, Washington to Las Vegas, Nevada, Godzilla leaves devastation in his wake, destroying lives. At least the ones that weren't already wrecked. But then, that's the dichotomy of Godzilla. On one side, a warning to the dangers of the atom bomb, and yet also a friend to mankind, as nuclear power can also be useful and good and helpful, as seen when Godzilla must fight yet another monster, a mutated Sasquatch called Yetragar, who threatens to destroy anything in its path. And wouldn't you know it, who should happen to ruin a giant monster fight but a small child? Yes, Rob steals Red Ronin again to attack, almost accidentally killing some rafting people in the process, though he's unaware of that, and interrupting an otherwise good brawl. Admittedly, it's still a three-way battle between giant monsters, but considering he still won't even try to hurt Yetragar, it really is a reminder that children and giant monsters don't mix. And personally, I'm not that fond of them at all outside of giant monsters. Birth the little things, stick them in a tube so they can mature in there, and then let them out. That's the science way. The kid is forced to kill Yetragar, though, so there's some hope for him yet. But enough about him, let's get back to the reason we're here. Godzilla! The king of the monsters reigns supreme, not just on Earth, but the entire universe! This is shown when aliens abduct Godzilla to help fight off a monster called the Beta Beast. As bizarre as that is, it isn't even the first time Godzilla's fought in outer space. The aliens have been fighting a war of attrition with another race. Their resources dwindle down now, only to kidnapping large monsters from other worlds and forcing them to fight. The aliens want the war to stop, especially since their enemies are dispatching a group of new monsters to Earth to conquer it for its resources. They actually manage to explain this to Godzilla, who seems to understand it on a primitive level. And so Godzilla teams up with Red Ronin once again to fight off these invaders. It is a glorious battle against the Mega Monsters, as they are called, with their own unique and frightening abilities that are so devastating to Salt Lake City, Godzilla, and of course to Red Ronin, whose head gets sliced off. But fortunately, S.H.I.E.L.D. arrives once again and realizes that Godzilla is not the aggressor here, distracting two of the monsters so Godzilla can kill the third with his claws and teeth, before then shooting his thermonuclear breath clean through the second, and finally uses the third monster's own helicopter tail, used to decapitate Red Ronin, and forces the monster to use it on itself, cutting off its own head. And with the knowledge that their monsters failed, the aliens and their enemies might even come to peace in the wake of their lack of resources to maintain war. Although funny that they still had enough resources to transport a giant monster from one planet to another. After a two-parter where Godzilla encounters a bunch of ranchers who are basically just straight out of a cowboy movie, although I suppose since he just went into space, it's entirely possible he's time-traveled now, the story does take a remarkably bizarre turn, courtesy of resident Ant-Man Hank Pym. By this point, Dum Dum Dugan is convinced that they shouldn't kill Godzilla, but he's still a rampaging monster, so they need a better solution to stop him. Namely, shrinking him down so he's more manageable. Why, even his radioactive breath just causes a little bit of scorching on Dugan when he tries to use it on him. And now Dugan presumably has cancer, I guess. Godzilla manages to escape his cage when they reach New York, and he's forced to fight a rat in the sewers, proving that even at that size, he is still the king of the monsters. he slowly begins to return to normal size, attracting the attention of the Fantastic Four. While S.H.I.E.L.D. lures Godzilla into a museum with high ceilings, the Fantastic Four just barely manages to restrain him, and only then thanks to Mr. Fantastic suffocating Godzilla into unconsciousness. Fortunately, the good Dr. Richards has a simple solution to the Godzilla problem. Time travel! Called it. Using one of Dr. Doom's captured time machines, they send Godzilla back to the Mesozoic era, 900 million years in the past. Well, actually, it's more like 65 to 250 million years in the past, but then again, why would I expect a scientist to know these things? Due to a combination of factors, including Godzilla's radiation affecting the time machine and a magical pit that Godzilla helped send some humans into back 900 million years ago, Godzilla is sent back to the present at full size, and with new Marvel characters to confront. Like J. Jonah Jameson, who happily yells out his window at the monster, who shockingly does not answer with his radioactive fire. But even more importantly, the Avengers! It's absolute pandemonium as the Avengers battle Godzilla, only Thor making a dent in him, Rob demanding that they can't stop Godzilla with brute force, and the city of New York somehow still standing during this awesome fight. And it all comes down to Rob convincing the monster to leave, the creature having somehow made a rapport with the young man, as he sinks off, never to be seen again. Well, sort of. Marvel lost the rights to Godzilla soon afterwards, but not wanting to let a perfectly good character go to waste, Dr. Demonicus returned in the pages of Iron Man to mutate his one-time foe so that he would appear different for copyright reasons. They never referred to him as Godzilla, just as a time-lost dinosaur. Just goes to show that Marvel knew what a good thing they had with the King, even if they couldn't really call him that anymore. The Marvel Godzilla comics are wacky, fun, and above all else, contain the kind of kaiju action we crave. Next time, though, we'll witness the terror of Godzilla! Adapted to manga, then translated into English. Really now, that's his backstory. Guess it all makes sense then, but Oh! Hello again, test subjects! Godzilla had been dormant on Japanese screens since 1975, with the end of the Showa era in Terror of Mechagodzilla. Several attempts had been made since then to revitalize the monster. Of particular note was one screenplay called Godzilla vs. the Devil, which I've got to say, getting ahead of yourselves a bit there. Instead, it was decided to return the monster to its dark roots as a symbol of nuclear annihilation, inspired by the 3 Mile Island incident, and thus was born The Return of Godzilla, or as it was redubbed by Roger Corman in the dub version, Godzilla 1985. But we're not talking about that version of the film today, especially because this episode is sponsored by Gatorade, not Dr. Pepper, but rather the original Return of Godzilla, and its manga adaptation, and later translation over in the pages of Dark Horse Comics, renamed again as Terror of Godzilla. It's even been colorized to really reflect the era more. A volcanic eruption awakens Godzilla, and we cut to 3 months later, when a reporter named Goro Maki finds a seemingly abandoned fishing boat after a bad storm, and that it's infested with giant sea louse. After killing one and taking the only survivor, Okamura, back to land, Okamura says that what really caused all the problems for them were not just the sea louse, but a giant tail that came out of the water to knock them around a bit. Gee, I wonder what it could possibly have been. They bring their belief to Professor Hayashida, who believes their story. It confirms what he has feared. Godzilla has returned. After Godzilla destroys a Russian submarine, the government orders a media blackout to try to keep panic from spreading about it. In preparation for when the story does break, Goro is sent to interview Hayashida, who recounts how haunted he and the rest of his generation of children were when they were orphaned by the monster. But now he feels differently. He feels a certain intimacy with the creature. Hey now, don't kink shame him. A lot of scientists have tastes that many would consider unorthodox. What I do in my laboratory is none of your concern. Back to the comic. Godzilla arrives on shore and attacks the Shizuoka nuclear plant, feeding on the radioactivity from it. Hayashida compares the creature more to a force of nature than an animal, and yet that comparison doesn't quite bear out when he's attracted by the call of seagulls out to the ocean once more. Coming soon, Godzilla vs. Birdemic. As both America and Russia demand the Prime Minister of Japan allow them to use nuclear weapons to stop Godzilla, his cabinet reveals that they have developed a new weapon to fight him without the use of such dangerous tactics. The Super X, a flying battle tank that can hopefully defeat him. During another attack, a remote launch system for a Russian nuclear missile is accidentally triggered and launches a missile. As people are evacuated into subway lines to try to minimize casualties, the United States launches one of their own missiles to intercept the Soviet one, just barely managing to stop it. Nuclear missiles, the cause of and solution to all of life's problems. After our heroes realize that Godzilla was called away by the sounds of the birds, Professor Hayashida believes that the high-frequency sounds are what attracted Godzilla, and they can use it to lure him away. Hopefully straight into a volcano. If they can't kill Godzilla, then perhaps the molten lava and energy can send him back into hibernation. That plan is made the contingency while the Super X is launched, using cadmium missiles to try to stop all nuclear activity in Godzilla's body. It does seem to hurt Godzilla, knocking him unconscious, but then the detonation of the Soviet missile hits, sending out an electromagnetic pulse that disables the Super X and knocks out all power in Tokyo. What's worse, Godzilla is then struck by lightning. I guess just the fallout of the nuclear missile hitting him would make too much sense. And he's able to permanently ground the Super X. With no other choice, the Professor's plan is called into action, stopping Godzilla before he flattens Goro during his rampage. Godzilla is sent hurtling into the volcano, Professor Hayashida remarking in his journal that the beast's cries were not those of something dying, but of sadness, regret that its freedom should be so brief, and that Godzilla was beyond good and evil, acting only on its own instincts. But even that still contained a threat, that someday Godzilla would rise again. And of course he did, both in the Heisei era of Godzilla movies and in the comics. When next we return, it will be over to IDW and 50 years of obsession. Really, and they just stole it. Oh, that was not a very smart one. Oh, welcome back, test subjects! And how appropriate that term is to today's comic in the Godzillathon. For by joining us, you have become a part of the weapons program meant to fight Godzilla and other creatures like him. The half-century war begins back during Godzilla's first attack on Japan in 1954. Lieutenant Ota Murakami, barely out of his teens and 2 years into his enlistment in the Japanese Defense Forces, has his platoon sent into Tokyo to provide disaster relief, only to be hit by that disaster head-on when Godzilla arrives to start annihilating the city. Noticing that the monster is going to head straight for some evacuating civilians, Ota and his friend Kentaro use the tank to distract Godzilla and lead it away from the civilians, just barely managing to survive as it heads out into the ocean. A month after the oxygen destroyer is deployed to kill Godzilla, the two are informed of a new Godzilla who's shown up. And unfortunately, the secret of the oxygen destroyer went down with its creator when they killed Godzilla. Sure, he didn't want to use it as a weapon of war, but damn it, half the fun of mad science is having this stuff at the ready again! And don't tell me he wasn't a mad scientist, he had an eye patch and everything! Since the two soldiers have had the most experience fighting Godzilla, they're recruited into the Anti-Megalosaurus Force, a division meant to test experimental weapons against Godzilla. Jump ahead 13 years to Vietnam, where Godzilla is now making his way through the war-weary country. While normally they could grab Godzilla's attention away and lure him back to the sea, this time something was making him ignore the military, moving with drive and resolve. The Americans have a plan to stop him, having built a giant sludge pit to keep him trapped, and then hopefully flatten him with ordnance. Despite the objections from the Japanese forces that conventional weapons don't work on him, the American general is stubborn. Oh yes, truly a great military mind. Ignore the people with actual experience with the threat. Fortunately, it's science to the rescue! Doc Randall, a drilling engineer, was recruited some time ago into the AMF and has developed not only specialized drills to punch through Godzilla's skin, but the sci-fi wonder weapon of Godzilla movies, the Maser cannons! And indeed, after the Americans fail, the Masers seem to be rather effective. Until the ground opens up beneath them, revealing what it is that Godzilla has been chasing. Anguirus! They plan to let the monsters fight it out, then use the remaining 2 Maser cannons to finish off the winner, but before Godzilla can kill Anguirus, the Americans bomb everything once more, and both monsters are able to withdraw without too much serious damage. However, Godzilla does not continue on its path, instead heading back to the sea. Following a hunch, Ota's superior officer went on ahead to Godzilla's path to see what it was he was chasing, and discovered some kind of radio device in a crashed plane that had been beaming signals out. Of course! Another mad scientist who knows the score! Control the giant monsters and conquer the world! Jump ahead another 8 years to Ghana as Ota reflects on all the new monsters that have come. Rodan from the Philippines, Batra, Megalon, Kumonga, Mothra, Ebera, Hedera, and so many more. The device that was in the crashed plane was an invention of Dr. Deverick, a former AMF scientist who had built a psionic transmitter to try to discourage Godzilla's attacks. And after that failed, he apparently turned it into a monster attractor instead, waking up all the other monsters on Earth. While they hunted for Dr. Deverick, eventually all the monsters began marching on Accra, capital of Ghana. The entire city is razed, save for a single building with the lights on, meaning that must be where the psionic transmitter is. Breaking inside and taking out a pair of guards, they locate Dr. Deverick, in the process of selling the power of the transmitters to any who wish to use it against a foreign enemy. You fool! You insane fool! You're supposed to use that power for yourself! Ransom the world's governments! Take over the world! You mad fool! Deverick escapes when they try to arrest him, just barely escaping as the monsters come crashing down on them. Another 12 years pass, and we find ourselves in Bombay, India. Ota is starting to feel the weight of 30 years of hunting Godzilla, not helped by the AMF being turned into glorified weather watchers in the wake of their failure at Accra. They could predict where the monsters would hopefully strike and maybe assist in damage control, but that was it. Other departments were formed, one creating Mechagodzilla to take on his originator, but while they watched the carnage from below, Ota manages to spot Deverick in the crowd and follows him after he sells a transmitter to 2 twins who say nothing. However, before they can shut off his latest transmitter, it summons forth a new abomination! Space Godzilla! How do you make a giant monster even better? Add the word space in front of it! For those of you unaware, Space Godzilla is indeed Godzilla from space, mutated from Godzilla's own cells as part of the latter Heisei-era movies. And this one comes down with crystals, wrecking Mechagodzilla and doing a fine job of dealing with the real deal. Ota manages to get into the wrecked Mechagodzilla and unleash its remaining payload on the giant crystals powering Space Godzilla, letting its namesake annihilate it in turn. And finally, 15 years after that encounter in Bombay, our little blue and green marble in the universe now has a distinctly more reddish tone to it. Think of it as you wish, as the blood of the human race. Or perhaps just a reminder of the constant fire created by the monsters. Mind you, as Ota writes the final few pages in his journal in the cold of Antarctica, not all of this was Godzilla's fault, but rather the 2 creatures summoned by Deverick's machine, King Ghidorah and Gigan, who turned the globe to cinders within a year of their arrival. And that's why doomsday devices like these are meant to scare people, damn it, not use them! What good is conquering a rock? Their last hope lies not only with Mechagodzilla, but an experimental weapon called the Dimension Tide. If shooting a miniaturized black hole at the monsters won't get rid of them, then they can just keep the damn planet. They lure Godzilla, Gigan, and Ghidorah to the same spot, and then join the fray. Godzilla even having enough rationality to join forces with his robotic counterpart to defeat the other two monsters. However, the enemy of my enemy is only my friend for as long as it needs to, and thus Ota sacrifices himself to ensure that Godzilla is absorbed by the Dimension Tide as well. Although in the final moments of the comic, some familiar spines begin to rise from the water. And thus ends the half-century war. Now the guns are silent. Godzilla is dead. But when you kill such a monster, where does it end up? Come back next week for the final comic in our Godzillathon to find out. Don't you worry about me, I'm not afraid of that pasty little... Welcome, test subjects, to the final part of our Godzillathon! We have seen Godzilla in many places now, from adaptations to original stories, in space, in time, over the course of many years. But now we come to his final destination, Hell! How did he get here? Well, Godzilla has died before, so just assume it was one of those times. Godzilla in Hell is 5 issues long, with different writers and artists creating their own unique tales of his journey through the underworld. Most of the comic is silent, save for the roars of the King of the Monster. But can even he overcome the worst place not on Earth? Arriving in Hell, he is immediately confronted by the message to all who venture too close. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. A sign that Godzilla immediately destroys before moving on. So is that confirmation that there is no hope, or is it that Godzilla is bringing hope to Hell? Inside a city full of demonic eyes and faces, what should he come across but a hellish nuclear plant? But the smokestacks are expelling something quite different into the air. Namely, a tentacled horror that Godzilla smashes underfoot. In the distance, Godzilla sees a cloud of damned souls, countless numbers of them. They swarm through the King of the Monsters like a storm until Godzilla emerges into the eye of it and is faced with himself? A bloody and scarred version? Curiously, Godzilla examines it, and it transforms into this abomination. He fights valiantly against the creature, but it's too much, eventually devouring him whole. Unfortunately for this demon, it's not the first to have tried that trick, and Godzilla destroys it from the inside out. However, the rocks he is on collapse, leading him into the next level of this abyss. He next encounters demonic versions of other monsters, like Ronin and Anguirus, as he goes through endless wastelands, some of ruined cities, others of ice and water. They are filled with devastation and failure. Perhaps the failure of other monsters to overthrow their king? Even another king, Ghidorah, waits for him as it creates a whirlpool that sucks Godzilla down into the next level. It is here where we see what could be a memory of how Godzilla arrived in Hell. A battle with Space Godzilla in Rio de Janeiro. Humorously enough, there seem to be some Easter eggs in the battlefield. A Power Rangers helmet, the SHIELD supercarrier from the Marvel series. Anyway, the fight rages for a few pages, obliterating everything around them, including the statue of Jesus, before their own combined blasts blow up the entire planet. Sure, it could have been them destroying the entire planet that put him there, but personally I think it was the blasphemy of destroying that statue. Ah, but he first arrives in Purgatory, and is met not only by an army of angels with Mothra wings, but indeed God himself. Or rather, Yahweh. It demands that he submit and serve peace, but Godzilla refuses to obey, crushing an angel between its hands before being sent down to hell. Unfortunately, Space Godzilla evidently arrived before he did, and is serving hell, the demons alongside it being ordered to consume Godzilla's heart from the inside out. Fortunately for him, it seems the angels still have use for Godzilla, for they arrive in force to defend him and empower him. He defeats the demonic Space Godzilla, and the angels say that he shall now serve them in the battle against Hell. And Godzilla blasts the portal to heaven closed. Both demon and angel alike try to start worshipping him, but he just chomps on a few of them and walks off. What is a mob to a king? What is a king to a god? What is a god to a non-believer? Godzilla. Still in Hell, Godzilla successfully defeats both King Ghidorah and Destoroyah. However, as he walks off, their injuries heal themselves, and they get right back up to resume fighting. They impale him, they decapitate him, and like them, he just gets right back up again. Noticing a wall surrounding the destroyed city he's in, he tries to blast it, but it seems indestructible. Eventually, after felling him again, the two enemies turn on each other, which allows Godzilla to resume his work in destroying the wall. The other monsters notice and try to attack him, but their own combined blasts open up a hole in it. Godzilla goes through it, but everything he left fades away as he leaves. As he enters the final leg of his journey, the void gives way to drastically changing weather. Rain, hail, and snow push him back as he keeps on journeying, eventually reaching a waterfall of blood and a narrow bridge onwards. The bridge collapses under him into a chasm of spikes that he, of course, just whips through like they were nothing. But these spikes are home to demonic creatures, just wings and teeth as they swarm at Godzilla, who finally ceases his journey when he reaches the tallest mountain in Hell. The mountain has a mighty creature atop it, barely visible amidst the storm and cloud at the top of the mountain, and its entryway into the sky. Godzilla tries his atomic breath, but it seems the journey has finally taken its toll on him, for he can barely puff out some smoke. Probably should have taken a break after that fight with Space Godzilla. You know, munch down a few more angels and demons like energy bars. He tries to climb the mountain and face the creature, but it just causes landslides that bury him back to the base. Knowing that he can go no further, Godzilla finally resigns himself to his fate and allows the Hellbats to devour him, leaving him as nothing more than a pile of bones, another victim of Hell. But then the now fattened Hellbats open their eyes and puff out a little smoke of their own, each roaring in their own tiny way like their meal. And soon the Hellbats make themselves into a makeshift flesh for the Godzilla bones, trillions of creatures screaming like Godzilla and attracting the monster's attention. Each of the Hellbats fires a beam of atomic breath that vaporizes the Guardian on top of the mountain. And thus the Hellbat-formed Godzilla marches up the mountain and finds a Torii gate at the top, a Japanese gate that symbolically marks the transition from the mundane to the sacred. And as Godzilla enters the gate, the words of the Buddha echo in the air. It is better to conquer yourself than to win 1,000 battles. Then the victory is yours. It cannot be taken from you, not by angels or demons, heaven or hell. And Godzilla emerges from an ocean back onto a new Earth, reborn once more. And thus ends Godzilla's journey through Hell. You can't keep the big G down. And in the end, I think this really proves the superiority of science to magic and mysticism. Coincidentally, that's why I think we should be renaming this series Test Tube of the Damned. And, of course, are you done?
Yes.
Then skedaddle before I put you in one of your precious test tubes.
Righto. I'll just, scooch past you. Yeah.
And as for you, my children, I'll see you in October.